When a person suddenly collapses from cardiac arrest, trained bystanders in the area do not rely on their own intuition. They execute a precise medical protocol known as the chain of survival, moving rapidly from early detection to CPR and advanced life support. We use a parallel chain of survival for mental health crises. The first link is the gatekeeper, a teacher positioned to recognize warning signs. They must initiate QPR, question, persuade, and refer, an intervention to direct a student to care. But frequently, this chain breaks. Having a clinically proven protocol documented on paper is useless if the individuals tasked with executing it cannot physically deploy it under extreme emotional pressure. Educators regularly encounter the gatekeeper paradox. This is a phenomenon where hours of theoretical clinical training evaporate the exact moment a real-life crisis begins. When a student expresses suicidal intent, the educator's nervous system floods with adrenaline. This biological stress response routinely causes them to physically and verbally freeze. Driving this freeze response is an intense psychological fear. They are terrified that saying the wrong word or asking the wrong question will inadvertently push the student closer to self-harm. If they do manage to speak, they often fall back on the writing reflex. This is the well-intentioned instinct of adults to immediately fix a problem, preach, or offer unsolicited advice to someone in distress. Clinically, telling a person in profound psychological pain why their perspective is incorrect backfires. It immediately triggers defensiveness and shuts down the lines of communication. Abstract knowledge from a seminar slide deck cannot override these autonomic human stress responses. Without ingrained physical muscle memory, the default human reaction under extreme pressure will always revert to the flawed writing reflex. To counter this instinct, clinical psychologists rely on motivational interviewing, or MI. MI is an evidence-based conversational approach designed to help people find their own internal motivation to change, respecting their autonomy rather than forcing advice upon them. This split-screen decision tree illustrates the mechanics of a crisis conversation. On the left side, the red vector represents the writing reflex. Notice how offering direct advice mathematically increases the subject's resistance to seeking help, resulting in a dead end. On the right side, the green vector successfully bypasses that resistance by utilizing the OARS model. OARS is the core operating mechanism of MI, standing for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflective listening, and summaries. The primary objective of using OARS is to safely navigate past a student's defensiveness to extract change talk. Change talk is any specific statement made by the student that expresses a desire, ability, or willingness to accept help. However, reaching this point requires executing the hardest step of the QPR protocol, asking explicitly and directly about suicidal intent. It is a confrontational action that is impossible to master by merely reading a manual. Passive pedagogical methods fail because they do not rewire how an educator's neurology actually responds to real-time hostility, evasion, or profound sadness. Building precise clinical competence requires a sandboxed environment. A sandboxed environment is an isolated, controlled testing ground where users can execute actions safely. In pedagogical terms, it provides a risk-free space. Educators are allowed to freeze, fail, trigger a student's defensiveness, and say the wrong things without any fatal consequences. The InTouch AI platform serves as the practical, scalable application of this sandboxed training environment for school systems. The platform's AI replicates complex, evasive, and hostile human behavioral patterns. It reacts dynamically to the user, simulating the volatility of a real crisis. As the educator speaks or types into the simulation, they are engaging with a dynamic, unpredictable entity, reacting directly to their specific approach. The AI adjusts the virtual student's hostility in real time. If the educator leans on the writing reflex, the student withdraws further. If they successfully deploy OARS, the student slowly opens up. Interacting with an adaptive model forces the educator to actively apply the protocol to neutralize human resistance. It bridges the gap between knowing the rules of a crisis and actually intervening in one. This platform also solves a critical measurement problem. It converts subjective soft skills, like empathy and active listening, into precise, data-driven telemetry. This dashboard displays the system's resistance tracking capability. It analyzes the simulated conversation, monitoring the virtual student's withdrawal levels in response to the educator's phrasing. The system meticulously evaluates the critical question phase of QPR. It flags the exact moment an educator avoids direct language and uses euphemisms out of fear. To generate this feedback, the system utilizes the CSSRS as its clinical baseline. The Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, or CSSRS, is a globally recognized evidence-based questionnaire used to assess suicide risk. Immediately following the simulation, the educator receives a readiness score. This post-action report points out the precise moments they deviated from the protocol and where they successfully elicited change talk. This line chart illustrates the physiological benefit of the sandbox. Repeated iterative practice inside this feedback loop steadily lowers the educator's adrenaline spikes during an intervention. Through iteration, the educator builds actual clinical muscle memory. This process effectively neutralizes the freeze response at the core of the gatekeeper paradox. When this training scales across a district, the impact shifts from individual intervention to the systemic resilience of the entire school environment, transforming daily interactions away from preaching and toward OARS-based partnerships improves the school climate and reduces teacher burnout. It establishes a unified clinical language. From specialized psychologists to substitute teachers and security personnel, every adult in the building understands and practices the exact same baseline protocol. This schematic demonstrates the management value of the resilience dashboard. By aggregating the anonymized readiness scores of the entire staff, it visualizes a dense, overlapping safety net across the campus. This dashboard allows school leadership to identify critical training gaps and specific vulnerabilities before an actual crisis ever occurs. Transitioning a staff from isolated theoretical lectures to continuous, aggregated simulation creates an institution that is proactively defended, rather than simply reactive to tragedies. Suicide prevention relies on mastered clinical skills, rather than intuition or the passive reading of protocols. When a life is immediately on the line, the situation demands the precise, unflinching execution of a clinical protocol. Without preparation, human emotion bends under the weight of a crisis. But with conditioned regulation, it becomes a structural force, holding completely firm. AI simulation training acts as professional armor. It protects the educator from absorbing the overwhelming psychological toll of the intervention itself. Equipped with this armor, educators can operate with calculated deliberation. They learn to override their own panic with tested clinical confidence. By repeatedly mastering the simulation inside a sandbox, they walk into the real world with the proven capability to reach out, ask the hard questions, and actually save lives.